All right, and we are live. Welcome back. This is episode 152 of Calibrated with Scott. I am your host, Scott, of course. Thank you all for being in here. I see a lot of you guys in here very early. A lot of people talking about the old thumbnail. Uh, just good fun with Brian. He's had some pretty big brain predictions throughout this conflict, so I thought it would be funny to throw that up in the thumbnail. I hope you guys like it. Um, yeah, but without further ado, the one, the only Brian Berletic from the New Atlas. Brian, how are you doing today, my good man?
I'm doing well. Thank you so much for having me back. Thank you so much for the flattering image of my gigantic brain.
Listen, the way I always think about it is anytime anybody's spending that much time creating something of your likeness, and it's not rude or defamatory in any way, I think it's good to flex that and show it off. So, and speaking of which, Brian, we have a ton to talk about today. And primarily what I want to focus on is just really drilling this idea home because we've been talking about this for 6 months to a year now. It's something that we regularly talk about when you come on these streams. It's something we regularly talk about in private. It's a common frustration that me and you both have when dealing with outside information sources and commentators that just kind of don't seem to get the very basic underlying directions that everything is generally going in. And particularly, I want to talk about the Trump administration and the European Union's, how do I put this? Their instigation or catastrophic destruction of the negotiation process. And I want to make it very clear that my position has been that these negotiations have been a joke and a farce the entire time, and that even the Russians seem to understand this entirely, and they're more playing a PR game, which is interesting to see because it's something that we haven't seen the Russians do throughout a majority of the war. But Brian, I want your take on this week's negotiation circus, theater, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I think that's the perfect word for it. It is theater. It is theater that the United States, first and foremost, is performing. And it's performing this in the same way that it performs theater in regards to its supposed negotiations, talks, and dealings with all of the nations that it has voluntarily labeled adversaries: Russia, Iran, North Korea, China, just to name a few. And the whole point of this is, and this is spelled out in policy papers spanning decades, the goal is to appear to pursue diplomacy, deliberately sabotage that diplomacy, then blame the failure of diplomacy on your designated adversary and use that as a pretext to then escalate against them. That is exactly what the United States is doing right now against Russia. They have everything being put in place to do this. This is what they have repeatedly done to Iran. This is what they are doing to China. And it is the same pattern. It is almost verbatim, stripped from these policy papers and implemented regardless of who is in the White House and regardless of who runs Congress. And I was looking through various policy papers. And Scott, you know this, we've been talking about this since U.S. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth said it in February this year. He delivered this directive to Europe. You're going to spend 5% of your GDP on NATO. Now they're all doing that. You're going to expand your arms industry. They're all doing that. You're going to double down. He literally said, double down on support for Ukraine. They're all doing this. He also said that the U.S. needs to get out of Europe because they need to pivot to China, and there needs to be a division of labor. That is what they are setting up right now. So literally everything that Trump supporters are now saying Europe is doing to sabotage the Trump administration and its efforts toward peace in Ukraine. These are all things that Secretary Hegseth told Europe to do. There you go, right there. It's verbatim. It's like ripped right from Secretary Hegseth's talk in Brussels on February 12th, 2025. So they had this checklist of things that they told Europe to do, and Europe is doing it. And this theater is meant to convince you that something else is going on and it's meant to keep at least part of the American and European public either behind these various administrations, the Trump administration, the various administrations in Europe, or opposed to it in a very predictable and benign way. In other words, they do not want people waking up to what this actually is. They want them either in support of it or predictably opposing it in a way that can be managed. It is theater, and it is a process of perception management. I talked about a paper in my last video about all of this. It's titled "Strategic Sequencing: How Great Powers Avoid."
Did you want to share it? I can put it up.
Yes. Hold on. Let me just. I'm gonna put it in the private chat.
In that DW article I just put up, they literally are quoted as saying, "Follow U.S. President Donald Trump's demand for increased defense spending."
Yes.
So while they're trying to maintain the theater on the outside, they still have to explain to their population why they're increasing their defense spending so much, why their quality of life is now going to diminish because government funding is now going to be going to military spending instead of, all the welfare programs and stuff like that. So continue, Brian.
Exactly. So I put the link in the private chat, and you'll notice on the very first page, it's by Wes Mitchell. And it is from the Marathon Initiative, which is just another arms industry corporate financier funded think tank. And you can see it says, "Project prepared for the Office of Net Assessment, United States Department of Defense." So this was not some random policy paper. This was prepared for the Department of Defense in 2020, the year 2020. So that is 5 years ago. And it says, and if you search division of labor, you will see the phrase division of labor mentioned. And you will see the whole paper talking about the United States needs to try to knock out Russia first and then China, or maybe it needs to put Russia on pause, deal with China, and then come back to Russia. And it even talks about Athens in ancient Greece, Athens putting a pause on its conflict with Sparta, with a peace deal, pausing it, freezing it, basically, dealing with the Phoenicians, and then circling back around to deal with the Spartans later, which is exactly what this is all about. That is what Secretary Hegseth laid out in February. We need to freeze this conflict. We are as it is now, we are losing it, and we will lose this conflict if we do not freeze it now. So we will freeze this conflict. We will deal with China, and then we will circle back around for Russia. There is 0%, or maybe negative interest in any sort of peace or accommodation with or of Russia. The goal is to what is the main objective? Subordinate Russia, subordinate China. There can be no peer or near peer adversaries. This has always been U.S. foreign policy for decades and decades, over a century now. That remains U.S. foreign policy. This is their primary objective. Everything else, if they're claiming, we want peace with Russia, it's because it is literally strategic sequencing. Yep. And they need to, if possible, convince the Russians. But if they cannot convince the Russians, and I don't think that they have, the second goal here is to at least convince as many people around the globe in the public and in diplomatic circles that the U.S. wants diplomacy, wants peace, and it's the Russians sabotaging it. And we can already see with the recent talks in Istanbul, what is the Western media narrative? Russia is the one that doesn't want, they're not serious about peace. So you could already see how this is shaping. So predictably, this is what we were talking about for months. And if you really think about it, for years, we said since 2022, if this proxy war fails, they will try to freeze it just like they did in Syria.
Just
since
like
2022.
Just like they did in Ukraine twice. This is not even a new thing for this conflict. This is a time and tested response to objective failure, I would say, in U.S. operations. So whenever a proxy war is going bad, you can just lie, is the only way I can really explain it. Lie to your adversary or whoever you're, poking and prodding, and say, okay, we're done. We're not going to support X, Y, or Z group anymore. And the conflict will just stop here. And then, 6, 7, 8 years down the line, when your economy is eroded eroded so much from a U.S. presence in your country or whatever is happening, then eventually, like we saw in Syria, the collapse comes, and then look who's the victor. And as you were talking about the strategic sequencing, what if you look back at, I mean, 1996, Benjamin Netanyahu was talking about going after these countries in the Middle East, right? Expanding Israel, doing all of this stuff. So this has been a long-term plan, at least in the Middle East. And when you look at how the U.S. has gone about removing Hezbollah, removing Bashar al-Assad, going after the Houthis, and now you're looking at Iran, and Iran is looking like a semi-isolated regime now, and that's not the position that they were in 4 years ago, right? They were the axis of resistance, if you will, was widespread throughout the Middle East, and now it is a shadow of itself. And I think that is just a testament to U.S. strategic planning. I think that they're doing exactly what they want to do in the Middle East, and it's going this exact direction that they want it to go. And they're going to try to do the same thing in Ukraine. Although I would like to talk about this with you, Brian, because this is something that my opinion has dramatically changed over the course of this last 2 weeks, maybe. The way that the Russian delegation that was in Istanbul, the way that the Russian political leadership and military leadership are now talking about this conflict seem much more realistic and much more grounded than at any other time throughout the conflict. I don't hear any talk of concessions at all from the Russians. The way that they seem to handle themselves within these negotiations. If you were to ask me from an outside perspective, I would say that this Istanbul meeting was an invite for the Ukrainians to come and basically capitulate. I think them leaving the 4 regions, giving up NATO ambitions, this, that, or the other, is literally just capitulation at this point. Do you agree with that? And I'm curious about your opinion about the Russian position, the Russian public position now.
Well, Ukraine is incapable of negotiating because it doesn't exist as a sovereign nation. The Ukrainian government in Kiev is just it has no agency. It is an extension of the United States. So it does whatever the United States tells it to do, and then it does it. And this is what it has been doing since 2014. It has been politically captured by the United States since 2014. Not just that, but the military and intelligence agencies have been completely captured and are now at the command of the United States. There are U.S. generals directing the Ukrainian military's efforts across the battlefield on almost every single level, from picking individual targets to the broad strokes of offensive and defensive planning. And this is all admitted all throughout the Western media. I've gone over the New York Times articles over the years, gradually releasing this information as if it wasn't abundantly clear to people really paying attention in the first place anyway. And so how does Ukraine negotiate with Russia? And what Russia's basically, what their position has always been, we need to solve the root cause of this conflict. And the root cause of this conflict is not Ukraine. The root cause of this conflict is NATO. And more than that, it is the United States' use of NATO as a weapon to encircle and contain, menace, and eventually threaten to absorb Russia. This has always been the threat that Russia has faced since the end of the Cold War. And this is what they have been reacting to since the end of the Cold War. The United States, you were talking about the Middle East. The U.S. has done this in the Middle East. They have done this in Europe, and they have done this in Asia to encircle and contain Russia, Iran, China, and then erode the different partners and allies of these 3 nations in every way possible, to absorb them, to destroy them, to leave them failed states, to win them over, transform them into proxies that you can then use as a battering rams. This is what has happened to Ukraine. Well, I think what Russia has been doing is trying to appear engaged in diplomacy. They lose nothing by dragging this out. It gives them time. If the United States has to pretend that it wants diplomacy, it has to kind of wait. Before Trump rolls out sanctions the minute he rolls out sanctions, all of these people still clinging to MAGA and this illusion that President Trump is somehow working against the so-called deep state, that's all going to blow away. So they're trying to put that off as long as possible. So it's a game. It's a game. Mark Sloboda has described it as a game of hot potato. You know, who's going to be left holding this hot potato? And so Russia and the U.S. are throwing it back and forth. They're throwing it to Ukraine. Ukraine is throwing it to Europe. And the U.S. is using both Ukraine and Europe as an excuse, as a scapegoat for why, oh, President Trump really, really wanted peace. But look at the Ukrainians and the Europeans that just undermining him at every possible turn by doing literally exactly verbatim what Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth told them to do back in February. So no, I don't think this was ever a serious negotiation. I don't think anyone on any side thought that it actually was. Yeah. Like you said in the beginning, it is theater. It's theater, and it's designed to manipulate and manage public diplomatic perception in every way possible.
I think the clearest example of this was after the initial Russian proposal to come and meet in Istanbul, the immediate denial from Zelensky, which was like the knee-jerk reaction, get on Twitter and come out and say a statement, we're never going to do this or that or the other. And then a day later, come out with a European ultimatum. Okay, well, we're going to go, but Putin himself has to be there for whatever reason that would be. When in human history has two heads of state ever come for the opening negotiations of a war? Like, that's not they will come at the end and sign the papers after all of the negotiating is done. So that was just a really weird thing to say. And I think it's very clear why they chose to say that, because now you can say, oh, well, Zelensky was in Istanbul, as if that matters at all. And he didn't even attend the actual meeting. And they can now use that to say, oh, Putin doesn't want to actually show up for the negotiations because the people that are very ignorant when it comes to foreign policy and wars and negotiations will look at that and say, oh yeah, why didn't Putin show up for that? If he wants peace, he should be there. And that's just not how it goes. So really, you see this, again, theater, but it seems to be, their demographic seems to be the group of people that is just not fully paying attention. And that's a large group, I tend to believe. So one thing that I did want to talk about is and this was just going back to what you had just talked about with the Europeans going right along with what the U.S. had said. And we had just talked about that DW article where the Germany is increasing their production or their military spending to 5% of their GDP. But we also have a news report coming in talking about how Germany is going to begin producing ATACMS, PAC-3, guided MLRS, Hellfire, and JAG-M missiles. And all of this is going to be now, they're building these facilities in Europe. Why, if you were looking for peace, why, if you were looking for a settled solution, why would you begin producing U.S. arms inside of Germany? This is a very curious thing to me. I know Germany does use some American arms, like the Patriot and stuff like that. And I know that they are all part of NATO, so this isn't a ridiculous thing. But you don't invest this much unless you're planning to do something with it, unless you're planning on replenishing all of your stocks and preparing for the next war or the next proxy war or whatever you're doing, or if you want to continue, say, arming your current proxy, right? This is why I believe we see Europe pushing for a 30-day ceasefire, which could become a 6-month ceasefire. If the Russians were goaded into it, could become a 1-year ceasefire. We've seen ceasefires that lasted from 2016 to 2022. So anything is really possible. And I think that this is really just the primary goal right now, is any sort of pause to get Ukrainian manpower back up, to get the overall situation on the front line stable. That seems to be the goal. And again, I know you just talked about it. No, none of this has seemed really serious from either side. Do we see the Russians now step up the intensity, do you believe, with not only their military activities, but also their their foreign policy posture and their geostrategic direction? Do we see them become more aggressive, start to put pressure on Europe, put pressure on the United States to potentially get something done in Ukraine?
Well, I think they're sticking to what the original plan was, which is a war of attrition to grind down Ukraine. I don't know how far they seek to go in Ukraine, but a ceasefire right now, they know, and the U.S. has all but come out and said we're just going to use this to freeze it, exactly like how we did in Syria. And how did that go in Syria? It went from freezing it because the U.S. was losing to freezing it, creating an opportunity for the U.S. to turn it around, to the U.S. finally and successfully overthrowing the Syrian government just late last year. And that's what they're going to try to do again in Ukraine. There is absolutely no interest in peace at all whatsoever. Russia understands this. They need to continue their momentum. If they were cornered into agreeing to any sort of ceasefire, the first thing that the Europeans would do is send their troops in under a ceasefire. And then Russia not only has to break a ceasefire, they have to actually directly attack Western forces. Right now, as it stands, European forces going into Ukraine, as things are right now with the conflicts, at full speed, they would be the ones provoking an escalation. If they could convince Russia somehow to agree to a ceasefire, corner them, get them to agree to it, and then put their troops in there. This was the plan. This is their plan, is to get that. And they're going to put as much pressure on Russia as possible, to overextend them as much as possible, to get them to either agree to a ceasefire or create some sort of opportunity where the European troops can move in and at least preserve part of Ukraine as a buffer zone that Russia will be unable to enter into and take without precipitating a direct conflict between Russia and Europe. And I know a lot of people are saying, "Oh, Russia, Europe can't possibly win a conflict against Russia." It's not about winning. It's about continuously overextending Russia in Ukraine while putting pressure on it elsewhere. This is why the U.S. was able to overthrow Syria in the first place. They drew Russia into this conflict in Ukraine. Russia prioritized Ukraine over Syria. Syria collapsed. They're not just putting pressure on Russia in Ukraine. They're putting pressure on Russia everywhere, including by putting pressure on their allies in Iran and also China. And so you have to zoom out and look at the big picture. It is not just Ukraine. It's not just how this conflict is going in Ukraine. It is how the big picture is shaping events as they move forward. And is Russia overextended? And if so, by how much? And we don't know. We don't know the answer to that. I think a lot of people were surprised by Syria collapsing. I think people thought that, considering everything Russia invested in keeping it propped up, that they would not have allowed that to happen. But it happened. Not only that, but Iran was seriously overextended. A lot of people like to pretend Iran has infinite power. They're invulnerable. They're not isolated, but they are isolated. They just lost a major ally in the region. And Hezbollah took a severe blow. And Ansar Allah in Yemen, despite what they're able to accomplish, they're not accomplishing this without a significant cost. And so it really is about who can last the longest, who's going to become overextended and collapse first. The US and Europe, Russia, Iran, and China. That's what we have to factor into this. And you cannot just look at the raw economic and military power China has and say, well, it's easily going to be Russia, Iran, and China, because China has no way of projecting that military power into either Iran or Ukraine, or in a way that could significantly help Russia at this point.
Yeah, and this is an actual good mental exercise too, and a question I'm going to ask you. We often talk sort of about the I would say almost anti-American foreign policy position. You're looking at it maybe not anti, but you're at least critically examining it and explaining it for what it is. Do you, what direction, and contextually, not obviously go about it a completely different way, without changing a ton of what's going on with the current US administration and the direction that they're going in the policy papers and everything? How do you see the US coming out on top? Do you think that this is just a continue down the path they're going? Do you think that they're winning right now in this global game? Do you think that they are overextending themselves? Because to me, it's beginning to look like the U.S. is almost in the position that the Soviets were at the end of the Cold War. The U.S. economy is not in the same position of strength that it previously was. It's not weak by any means, but it's not the global hegemon economy anymore. Global trade is being contested, and we are seeing the U.S. not performing particularly well against the Houthis, for example, and even Israel not performing particularly well in Gaza, which is neither here or there. It's not really a military intervention. It's more of an ethnic cleansing, in my personal opinion. But they're still not performing particularly well there. And then also in Ukraine, and I know it's not about winning. I know that it's not. It's about overextension. But in that exact question you asked, who will be overextended first? Looking at it from this spot right now, what is your opinion on who is more overextended?
Again, you have to zoom out and look at the big picture. And there's so many factors at play here. So right now, Russia, obviously, it is producing more arms, ammunition, building up its combat power much faster than all of the West combined can support Ukraine in doing. But in Ukraine, and we saw that the cost for Russia in managing this is being unable to protect its interests in Syria, being unable to support their allies in Syria. And Iran also is so overextended that they were unable to hold on to Syria. That is a fact. And whether people, you don't want to admit it, but it is a reality. They were unable to. They are overextended. They're not all powerful, and there's serious limits to their power. China also has serious limits to its power, has huge economic power, but there are vulnerabilities. So we have to look at what is the objective of the US? The US wants to maintain hegemony over the planet. They do not want peer or near peer competitors. They do not want a multipolar world to emerge where a balance of power is distributed across all nations. They want to concentrate that power in their hands and maintain a monopoly, in a military, industrial, economic, political monopoly over the planet. And once multipolarism reaches a certain critical mass, it'll be irreversible, and the US will never be able to turn it around and undo it. So this is what they're fighting against. The problem is Russia, Iran, China, the multipolar world, they are trying to build something. And the US, in order to win, they don't necessarily have to build anything. They just have to destroy multipolarism. And so this is where the problem lies. It's much easier to destroy than it is to build up and create. And we can see how this is playing out. In the Middle East, for example, yes, Israel, if you really think about it objectively, what Israel is doing is not to its benefit. What success are they actually having? They're spending huge amounts of resources fighting all of these wars with absolutely everybody in the region. Yes, they helped knock out the Syrian government. They've wiped out the senior leadership of Hezbollah. They've completely flattened Gaza. And they're waging this war together with the United States against Yemen. But none of this is actually to the actual benefit of Israel. Israel, whether people want to admit this or not, is just another Ukraine. It is an expendable proxy of the United States. The US will use it to the fullest extent necessary to prevent multipolarism from taking root in the Middle East. So if that means having Israel wage war against Iran as a US proxy against Iran, even through the use of nuclear weapons, if it comes to that, then that is what will happen. This is why we see Iran people like, why doesn't Iran do more? Why don't they just launch all their missiles at Israel? Why don't they do this, that, and the other thing? Because they understand that if they escalate on their side, they're just making it easier and easier for the U.S. to go to that maximum option that they have and could exercise if the Iranians allow them to justify it. So it's a very complicated balancing act that Russia, Iran, and China are playing. They don't want to escalate. They want the clock to time out. And the U.S. wants to rush and escalate, but they want to make it look like it was Russia, Iran, and China that provoked it. And so that is how the U.S. could potentially win, not by being stronger and smarter and better and more powerful economically, but just by destroying everything that multipolarism is trying to build. We've talked about this, Scott, many times. The U.S. is openly preparing for a maritime blockade against China. They're already kind of beta testing this against Russian ships moving or ships moving around Russian hydrocarbons, looking for different ways they could justify and actually implement the interdiction of those ships. And then they will expand this to Chinese maritime shipping. They already are talking about the Panama Canal and Greenland. They're here in Asia Pacific, where I'm based. They have this huge military presence. They're also attacking all along China's Belt and Road Initiative. These are land routes that the Chinese built to circumvent potential maritime blockades. So this is a full spectrum conflict already. I mean, a lot of people say World War III has already started. In many ways, it has.
It's like a soft core World War III.
Something like that, or it's like a slow motion hybrid world war. And these are all the things that you need to add up. And so I caution people against being, overly triumphant when they see Yemen frustrating the U.S. I mean, that is a limit of U.S. military power being exposed there. That's absolutely true. But then there's other things that the U.S. is capable of doing that people's complacency invite, like the collapse of Syria. What they couldn't achieve through military power, either themselves or Israel or Turkey, they achieved through asymmetrical means, the political interference, their ability to move into a country and politically capture it, to circumvent a nation's military power and undermine it through other means, through information space, political space, the economy, the education system, culturally. So this is, again, you have to look at the big picture. I don't know if that answers your question, Scott. I would say it's impossible to tell.
Yeah.
And you have to constantly add up all of these factors. You cannot just look at what is going on in Ukraine or in the middle. Far too many people do this. They're looking at Israel, Gaza, Yemen, Iran. They're not looking at, and because it's uncomfortable to admit what happened in Syria, they just pretend like that didn't happen, or they make excuses. They rationalize why that happens in a way that doesn't force them to admit the limits that Iran, Russia, and China have. So it's complicated. It's impossible to tell. I would warn people against underestimating the United States.
And this is an argument that I like to make all the time as well. Just like you said, the U.S., they don't have to win. This is something that I just think people are having a hard time understanding. Ukraine losing was the plan the entire time. This is not some battle of good versus evil, of maintaining democracy or some whatever. It has nothing to do with that at all. Lindsey Graham was telling you exactly what the plan was year one of this conflict. The best money we ever spent killing Russians to the last Ukrainian. Ukraine is not useful now to the European Union or to the United States as some half-broken welfare state that the European Union is going to have to keep afloat. It's not worth it to them. It's better to burn Ukraine to the ground with as many Russians in it and overextend Russia as far as possible within Ukraine. And then once they have it all, they can have it. Like what is Ukraine to Europe? What is Ukraine to the United States? It's nothing. It's a battering ram, just like Brian said, just like the Baltics could be a battering ram, just like the Philippines could be a battering ram, just like any proxy in the Middle East is a battering ram, just anything. Like we're talking about the Belt and Road Initiative, right? Brian, I think you made a statement about Pakistan and India. Like any disruption in that part of the world, any large conflict there, whether it's brought on by the U.S. or not, is going to disrupt the Belt and Road Initiative. It's going to disrupt China's alternative to sea lane shipping. And why not, right? If you're already at war in the Middle East, right, you're letting Israel bomb everybody. You're already at war in Europe, right? You're fighting a proxy war against Russia. Why wouldn't you just create another war somewhere else that disrupts, again, your primary target, which is China? And they talk about it with Iran, just pulling Iran away from China to separate the energy connection. And then same thing with Russia, bringing Russia over onto this side so that it's they don't have the Russo-Chinese relationship. And I think the U.S. is losing on that front. I think that is the one place where the U.S. is actually losing, is they're not actually pulling anybody away. They're going to have to pry everybody away. There's no soft power here working where you're going to see a regime change and then, a country is just going to be on side. I think we're a little bit past that now. I think we're at the point where it has to be through aggressive kinetic means almost exclusively. And I think that's what you're seeing the U.S. go through. Brian, does people's idea about this Trump administration change when the sanctions get levied against Russia here as soon as these negotiations fail?
No, because there will be an excuse, a rationalization, just as Trump supporters have done all along. If you were being objective, before President Trump, before he even won the election, the people he picked to surround himself with, the things that they were saying before the election, J.D. Vance, for example, before becoming vice president, he said, we're going to dump Ukraine on Europe, and we shouldn't be wasting weapons on Ukraine. We should be wasting them on China. We should be using them on China. These aren't people breaking with the deep state, breaking with the neocons. They are in full support of these policy papers that were written years ago and being implemented under the Biden administration. And it's just a matter of managing public perception that they use this narrative or that to sell why they're doing it. But when you actually strip away all of the political rhetoric, you see only continuity of agenda. Tell me one thing that has changed since Trump came into office that was not taking place under the Biden administration. People will say DEI and the border, which is all superficial. None of that is these aren't real problems. They were not actually really solved. The problem on the border is not actually the problem on the border of the United States. The problem is U.S. interference on the other side of the border. Nobody's talking about that. Nobody's dealing with that. Trump did do things, in terms of performance. Oh, I'm going to close the NED, USAID. All of these things are still open and operating, all of them. And I had people say, well, Brian, Trump tried to shut down the NED, but they sued. And so now they're getting their funding back. If you're going to take on the deep state and you're going to take away the NED's funding, you didn't think that the first thing they're going to do is go to court and sue you to get the funding back? And you didn't have a plan for that? It's almost as if your heart really wasn't into it. It was all performative. And it was all just to convince people that you're different, that this time the change is for real. President Trump was already in office for 4 full years, and he continued absolutely everything that was handed to him from the Obama administration. And Trump supporters aren't unique in this compartmentalization, rationalization, delusion. Obama supporters did this for 8 years straight. Do you remember President Obama, before he stepped foot into office, vowing to end all of these wars? He not only continued them, he started new wars. He ramped up U.S. interference all around the globe. There was the pivot to Asia. Again, it was all from these policy papers about encircling and containing Russia, Iran, China. The so-called Iran deal, the Republicans make it out as if Obama was appeasing the Iranians, but it was always the plan to draw them into a deal, just like Trump is doing now. He's a Republican. Last time I checked, he's trying to draw Iran into a deal. They sabotage the deal, blame it on Iran, and use it as a pretext to escalate. That is literally written out in detail in the 2009 Which Path to Persia paper. And so I always say American empire is something too big to be decided by just the whims of a random politician. It's an empire, just like a house, a community, a city requires planning and documents. Everything is written down in detail. It is signed and it is dated. And all you have to do is read it to see what they are actually really doing. When you understand that, you can easily filter out all of the political rhetoric and you can see exactly what is happening. But because Trump, doesn't matter if it's a Trump supporters, people who support the Democrat Party in the US, all of these people on one side or the other in European politics, they're emotional. And, it takes a lot of effort, not just to do real objective analysis, but to compartmentalize your emotions, separate it from your analysis. And people are unable or unwilling to do it. It's uncomfortable. It's the truth is ugly and they don't want to accept it. They don't want to accept that this person that they put their faith into, Trump, is a liar. He's just another politician who told you what you wanted to hear again, just like he did the first time he was in office. And now he's just doing the exact opposite of what he said. And for the exact opposite reasons he said he was going to do all these things. He serves the deep state. He is openly working for BlackRock. He is cutting deals for BlackRock, which is the deep state. He is singing the praises of Big Pharma. All these people thought President Trump and RFK Jr., they're going to save us from Big Pharma. He was literally on Truth social media singing the praises of Big Pharma. People filter it out. They see it. When they filter it out, they see only what they want to see. They filter everything else out. So, in the mind of Trump supporters, no, I don't think there's anything that he can do that is going to change their mind. We can look at the, 8 years of Obama and see how Obama supporters reacted. There is a minority that will wake up and they will be shaken awake and they'll never be able to go to sleep again. But the majority of people are going to choose delusion and rationalization.
I think the biggest red flag is I don't know why Marco Rubio became not a neocon when Trump got into office. I don't know what happened. I don't know what happened to that guy, but for a long time, people were not very happy with him. And then as soon as he's on Trump's team, now he's not pushing the exact same agenda he's been pushing for the last 20 years for some reason, just out of nowhere.
Scott, I mean, do you remember when the name Marco Rubio first floated around? Trump supporters were shocked. They were enraged. They suspected this was some kind of trick by the deep state to destroy the Trump administration, even before, undermine its credibility even before it steps foot into office. And then when it was confirmed that, yes, this actually is Marco Rubio, then you saw all of the excuses, all the rationalization into why President Trump picked he's an arch neo. He's like the king of neocons. He's the worst neocon alive and still in power today. The worst, the absolute worst. There's not a single war. And when he talks about multipolarism or we're here in Saudi Arabia to make peace with Russia, he cannot hide the smile. He's just completely lying, and he's mocking the people who have placed their trust for some reason into this neocon warmonger just because Trump anointed him.
And it's hilarious too because Trump railed on him in the election campaigns, yes.
And vice versa.
Yeah, and then now they're just all chummy, buddy. It's like the slimiest. It's just the slimiest business to watch take place. I don't know. I wanted to go through just a couple of these questions just because they make some interesting points that I want to talk about. Remember, if you guys have questions that you want answered live on air, you can always do that through super chats. So this one, I just wanted to say something. If U.S. armed Ukraine, Russia should do the tit for tat against the U.S. This goes back to something that Brian said earlier. The U.S. is in the business of destroying everybody else's growth, right? Everybody else is not in the business of destroying everybody else's growth, including the U.S.'s. Usually it doesn't bring great karma onto your country when you go around messing with the hegemony in different parts of the world. However, I do think that this is going to happen. I think that if the U.S. is really becoming overextended and we begin to see that, you will see China, Iran, and Russia take advantage of these weak spots around the map. And I think you're already seeing some of this take place in Africa with a number of the regime changes that have turned more pro-Russian in the Central African region. But Brian, I'm curious as to your take on the tit for tat, the eye for an eye.
I think you made a good point there. The way Russia and China see it, it's instead of destroying nations surrounding the United States, they're doing the exact opposite. This is America's worst fear. They're going into Africa. They're building up governments that can protect themselves. and then grow and then develop. Africa has been frozen in time by Western imperialism for generations, and now they have this opportunity to get infrastructure, to build modern cities, to have access to modern healthcare and education, to build up institutions that will allow their population to thrive. And this is America's worst nightmare. This is how Russia does this tit for tat back against the US. Instead of just being the mirror image of the United States, it's like fighting destruction with construction, with creation. And it is working. And this is what is slowly chipping away at American primacy. Now, I'm warning people that the United States is not, this isn't a done deal. Multipolarism is not a done deal. But you can see a very clear transition from Western hegemony to multipolarism. You can see it's very clear. And it is something that once it reaches critical mass, it will be irreversible. Is it already irreversible? I would argue not quite yet. But that's what Russia and China, and if Russia, China, Iran, if they want to get back at the United States, that's what they will invest in, not destruction, mirroring American interference and destruction, but through construction. One thing that I will say, a lot of people always argue, China, if China takes over, they'll become just like the United States. But you could already see, and this goes to your point, Scott, that they go into countries and do something completely different. The US and Europe have never, ever done. They go into a country and they do business, and they do mutually beneficial business. They do not just go in there and strip mine countries. I'm in a country that China does business with. I'm in Thailand. China does business here. And it is obviously, you can see it tangibly, materially beneficial to everyone on both sides in ways. When the US was dominating Asia before the rise of China, this country did not benefit from. So think about this also. China has risen to superpower status in the first place without firing a single shot. This century, China has not fired a single shot. They have not invaded any country at all. They don't occupy anyone. They're not undermining or putting sanctions on anyone to crush them, to coerce them. They're reacting to Western aggression and encroachment on them, but they themselves are not building up their political and economic power in the same way the collective West did over the generation. So it's a completely different system and a completely different approach, including the way they react to the US when the US threatens them.
It's like China goes about it like they're building a future market, whereas the US is subjugating a future colony. Kind of seems like the difference. So we got comments all from the same guy here, Flying Boar. So Trump is a disappointment. He learned nothing from his first term. He doesn't have the guts to go against the establishment and deep state. This is exactly the point I think me and Brian have been trying to make the entire time. This is not, I mean, you could say that Trump is not going against the establishment, and that's fine. I think that if he were to sincerely go against the establishment in the way that you want him to, he would be killed almost immediately. I think that the U.S., like Brian has talked about, it's this giant rock coming down a hill at you, right? A president is not going to be able to stand there and stop the momentum of this giant rock. There are certain geostrategic realities that the U.S. has to maintain. It's not like we can just switch exactly what we're doing and go the China route and everything's just going to be hunky-dory. Like, that's not realistic. That's, go ahead.
Well, they could, Scott. They could. The problem
is it going to happen?
Yeah. Like, just to make it clear, you have to understand, what is the U.S. system? The U.S. system is a system of monopoly, maximizing profits, maximizing power at the expense of absolutely everything else. Yeah. Even your own long-term self-preservation. That's not even a thought. It's like a swarm of locusts. Yep. So in that sense, just like a locust can't change their nature, this system cannot change its nature. But the U.S. could. It could just say, look, we're done with this. We're going to nationalize everything, all these monopolies, just like President Putin did to Russia. Once he took power, and he was clearing out all of the Westerners that were strip mining Russia and all the oligarchs who were collaborating with them. He cleared them all out. He told everyone, make a choice. You either work with us, or you go to prison, or you get out of the country and you don't come back. And those oligarchs all had to make that decision. Someone in the U.S. could do that, but it would come at the expense of these huge corporate monopolies. The U.S. would no longer be the most powerful nation on earth. But when you really think about it, why should it? There's nothing exceptional about the United States. It's not the largest population on earth. So why should it have the most power, military and economic power? This doesn't even make any sense. So it is an unnatural system doing something unsustainable. It in itself, because of its nature, will not change course, but the U.S. could, and Americans would be better off for it. Mm-hmm. But one thing I want to make about the comment on the screen is Trump never had any intention of changing anything. He's an actor. He's an actor. He's a performer. He literally participated in professional wrestling performances. He had a reality TV show for years and years. And if you watch his performance, that is literally what he had done for years before taking political office. And that's what Washington is there to do. They don't make policy. They sell it to the public. They sign off on it and they sell it to the public. That's what they're there to do. That's what Trump came into office intending to do, to sell you an illusion and hope you fall for it.
Another comment. There's no difference between Trump and Obama supporters. They both defend what these do. Yeah, this is just the binary system we have, especially when you're emotionally invested in said binary system. And you think that the other side is potentially a Hitlerian figure, something of that nature. When that's the mental state you're in, you're going to defend and cope and do whatever you need to do to make the person that you voted for and the person that you gave your trust to make sense when they're obviously doing things that have none of your own interests in mind. And let's see. Trump shaking hands with Jelani. That's an insult to every American who was killed by Al Qaeda and ISIS in Iraq, Syria. It's also an insult to the 3,000, I think it was 2,000 people who died in 9/11. Trump supporters don't see, or was it 2,900 people or something like that? Trump supporters don't see that. This was a very weird situation. I know that Turkey and the U.S. are in the same alliance, so Syria falling, it didn't matter if it was to, the Kurds in the north or if it was to the Turkish ISIS or Al-Qaeda-backed militants in the Idlib region. It's very interesting to see somebody who was the day before a recognized terrorist on a watch list.
10 million bounty on his head from the U.S. government.
This is the gentleman that now got sanction relief for Syria. Explain to me how Bashar al-Assad was this horrible, maniacal maniac, but the dude literally cutting off heads is somehow the savior of Syria and the one who gets the thumbs up from the United States.
Well, Scott, the United States, I mean, the support was laundered through Turkey.
Yeah.
But it was ultimately the U.S. who built up Al-Qaeda, ISIS, and all of these other subsidiaries. They built them up deliberately. This started all the way back under the Bush Jr. administration. And then if you really want to go back even further, in the 1980s, when they created these militants in Afghanistan to fight the Soviet Union. And so the U.S. had always been behind Al-Qaeda. And all of these things, if you believe the actual story about 9/11, they are a U.S. proxy that carried out that attack on the United States that then created a pretext that the U.S. was looking for years, a pretext to do this global military push to spread the U.S. military over the globe as a wet blanket to smother emerging multipolarism. That's what it was always all about. President Trump, during his first 4 years, was 100% behind the U.S. Plan strategy to undermine and overthrow Syria, including support of the terrorists. And so him shaking hands with Al-Qaeda and him being rebranded. How many times have they done this already, regardless of who the president is? This is what they did in Libya. The Libyan Islamic Fighting Group was on all kinds of U.S. terror lists. And then as soon as the U.S. pulled the trigger on regime change in Libya in 2011, Libyan Islamic Fighting Group was taken off the U.S. terrorist list. They were armed. The U.S. used resources to take them from Libya to Syria to fight there. And Europe brought these fighters into Europe for sanctuary when they were being hunted down by the Syrian government. And they were carrying out attacks in Europe, and they were fueling this strategy of tension in Europe between Islamophobia and these fake extreme. Well, they're real extremists, but they are engineered and backed by the U.S. It has nothing to do with Islam. And they created this huge clash of civilization that they used to manipulate the public. So on every single level, Trump is complicit in all of this. And so him shaking hands with a literal head-chopping terrorist whose men are now slaughtering Christians and other ethnic and religious minorities, Alawites, yes, and everyone else, and Sunni and Shia Muslims who aren't on board with their brand of extremism. That's who he's shaking hands with. So I see people in the comment section, Brian's anti-American, he has Trump derangement syndrome. You explain to me why Trump is sitting there shaking hands with a terrorist who's slaughtering Christians in Syria. Now, please explain that. I really look forward to reading.
Equally just as odd, he's in Qatar or Qatar. How do you say it?
Qatar.
He's there shaking hands with equally despicable individuals who have, I'm pretty sure, been funding Hamas, right?
Well, that's again, Scott. That's the whole thing. The whole thing between Hamas and Israel is another strategy of tension meant to suck everybody in. And no matter which side you pick, you're holding up at least half of America's agenda in the region. That's what people they don't understand.
It's a win-win.
Scott, do you remember October 7th when Hamas attacked Israel or Israeli-held territory? And I warned people that was a red carpet rolled out for Israel to flatten Gaza. And I remember everybody screaming and shouting how Israel was done. They're finished. This is the beginning of the end. How'd that work out? This is why you have to separate your emotions from your analysis. You have to follow the money and follow the truth, no matter where it brings you, no matter how uncomfortable that trip to the truth actually is.
I wish I was on mushrooms to see the full power of Brian's mega mind. You don't have to be on mushrooms to see it. We're witnessing it before our very eyes. People think Trump is a good businessman. The guy went through how many bankruptcies? Again, this is the whole, like, you're losing, but somehow you're still the president of the United States who's dictating global policy. So is he really a bad businessman? It seems like at the end of his run, he got 2 terms in office. And then since Trump's 2 assassination attempts, he is not the same person. Do you think it was a warning shot? No, I do not think somebody put a warning shot through his ear. That would be wildly impressive. However, if there was something going on behind the scenes, he's definitely shaped up, and he's following U.S. policy and continuity of agenda perfectly. So
I would say, no, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to say, I don't think it had anything to do with that, but either way, he's doing exactly what we thought he was going to do. So,
I was going to say his first 4 years was 100% continuity of agenda. So what did they have to shoot at him for? No reason. He's already a team player. He's already doing literally everything they ask him to do. He's doing it, and he's doing it in a really great way that you couldn't ask more from President Trump. He is the ultimate performer. He has divided America so skillfully. He has divided and disarmed the American people, their ability to think critically, their ability to reason, do analysis, to think for themselves. It always had been that way in American politics, extreme polarization. He has supercharged it. So what would they shoot him for? And I think we don't know the details behind these 2 attempts or however many attempts that there were. It could just be America's losing its mind. It's an extremely violent country. Society is unraveling. People are constantly shooting at each other. So why not take a shot at a presidential candidate too? Why not?
Why not? Yeah, it's just wild that people still haven't caught on. There's still people that are just in that cut that just won't accept that, Trump isn't doing what he had promised at all, first and foremost. Second, that, I mean, just the fact that there's not an omission that the president is even all that powerful to begin with, is not, it doesn't seem to be there. So I again, me and you, Brian, we've had this conversation more times than I think I can count. But I'm glad that we're still having this conversation, and I'm glad we're still putting it forward. Is there anything that you want to talk about? Anything going on in your neck of the woods?
Well, I wasn't even really paying attention to the Istanbul talks because, and I put a video out recently, but it was from an article that I wrote like over 2 weeks ago about when people read it, they thought I was talking about Istanbul because literally nothing has changed between then and now. It is the exact same game that they're playing. And so I don't know what to say to people that are still clinging to Trump as some sort of savior figure. I see people in the comment section trying to say, well, the world is messy. Sometimes your enemy becomes your ally. Why is al-Jawlani, the head of Al-Qaeda in Syria, who's still mass murdering innocent people right now? Why is Trump shaking hands with them? What is the reason for this?
Why not Assad?
You're dropping bombs on the heads of people all across the region, but you won't drop a bomb on his head. Why not? You're going to threaten to overthrow all of these other countries. You're not going to overthrow. You're not even going to talk about it. We put this guy into power and he's a terrorist.
It would be so easy to overthrow him right now. The regime is weak. They don't have weapons. Yes. They don't have go now. Like, why are you making deals with him? Also, and then we're talking about Jawlani. Why not make a deal with the guy who had the Syrian country in a place of stability? You had a guy who was actively fighting ISIS. You had a guy who probably could have been convinced and pulled away from Iran somewhat. I think that was a very realistic option there. I think the reason why he was so close with Iran is because of the position we were putting him in. And you already had a peace agreement with the guy. You had already proven that he was a negotiable individual that you could deal with. And instead, now you have, like you said, the head chopper who's killing Christians and who's there defending them? Again, who's there defending them? The Russians.
And this is all about burning the region to the ground, not stable, because it was already stable. The U.S. came in, deliberately destabilized it, divided it, and is burning it to the ground right now as we speak. There's no justification. These people in the comment section trying to make it out as if, oh, foreign policy is so complicated. How come Russia and China don't have such a complicated foreign policy? And people will say, well, Russia has sent representatives to Syria. They lost. They don't have the ability to change anything in Syria now. They have no choice. America does.
And even when they were there, who were they bombing? Who was the two groups that Russia bombed when they were in Syria?
Yeah.
Al-Qaeda and ISIS.
Yeah.
Like it's not. You're talking like the Russians weren't really the bad guys there. I mean, the means about which you go about fighting that enemy. I guess you could make the argument that it wasn't, the most morally justified or whatever. But again, it's not. They're trying to maintain the stability in the region. They're not trying to put head chopping Islamic jihadists into power. And then another point that you had talked about earlier, and I just wanted to mention it. Every time we see a terror attack in, particularly Afghanistan, I see it a lot. I see a lot of the Chinese engineers there getting attacked. Busfuls of Chinese workers get blown up regularly in Afghanistan. And then as well in Russia, some of the terror attacks we've seen, all of these groups are always linked back to these Al-Qaeda linked organizations. So it's very
and there's policy papers, there's bills in Congress over the years, all in support of these Baluchistan terrorists that are killing these Chinese engineers who are trying to build infrastructure in Pakistan, to build up Pakistan, to develop the country so people have better lives. The U.S. is behind the people, murdering them and trying to keep the country stagnant and in destitution.
Did I say Afghanistan and it's Pakistan?
Maybe you did, but it's Pakistan.
Pakistan. Okay, I meant Pakistan. I did not mean Afghanistan. October 7th, I have my doubts. Israel had their eyes and ears in Gaza, and Mossad screwed up. I think Israel allowed it to happen so they can get an excuse. I would almost tend to agree. I don't know if they thought it was going to go quite as dramatically as it went.
Oh, I think they wanted it to. They
but
wanted it to. They wanted a pretext.
They literally have a fence around the whole place. It is a concentration camp. You're telling me that this was one of the most successful prison uprisings we've ever seen in human history? It's ridiculous.
And they have infiltrated Hamas. And Hamas, just as you were saying, Scott, they're backed by Qatar, which is hosting the U.S. military. They're all the same people supporting both Israel and Hamas. This is what people understand. The people in Palestine have a right to resist. They have a right to take up arms and defend their lives and their homes. But you need to have a legitimate resistance organization. Hamas is simply because, just like you say, Scott, they're completely surrounded. They're completely infiltrated. Their support, their sponsorship comes from U.S. allies. They don't have the ability to create a legitimate resistance organization. I'm not saying that there aren't legitimate people in Hamas fighting for their homes and their land, but it doesn't matter what you think you're fighting for. It only matters what you are actually fighting for. And that is the problem. That is the difference between Hamas and Hezbollah.
And then somehow still Iran was the head of the Hamas snake.
Yes.
however that works.
and the thing is, Iran does try to exercise influence over Hamas specifically to flip it into a legitimate resistance organization. Let's go with the next comment.
Trump shaking hands with Saudis. These are the same Saudis that trained the 9/11 perpetrators. Does know anything about this? Yeah. Also, if anybody was curious, the first aircraft that were allowed to fly over U.S. airspace, international aircraft, was the Saudis. So, I mean, it's yeah. I didn't know that Brian was such a 9/11 truther, but
Scott, do you know I was in the U.S. Marine Corps when it happened, and I ran into people I trained with in basic training who are now at that time in infantry, and they were telling me they were getting ready for some major thing. It was not just routine training. They were getting passports, they were getting desert uniforms, and they were training to go to some place with mountains. They didn't know where. This was the summer before 9/11. So they were preparing to go to Afghanistan before it happened, and they shipped right out as soon as it happened. And so whether you believe the actual, the story they claim happened, or you have, doubts about the official story, Al-Qaeda is a U.S. creation. I remember even officers in my unit were like, yeah, we created these guys. And at a minimum, this is blowback. But, at worst, though, it's done by design. You're using these extremists that you created to make a pretext for a global push to smother multipolarism before it emerges. If you read the policy papers back then, it was all about preventing Russia from reemerging after the collapse of the Soviet Union, and preventing China from rising. Now China has already risen. Russia has already reemerged. So you can see what it was like back then to where it is now. And you can see the gradual struggle, how it has transformed from trying to prevent it to happening, to trying to undo it from happening, to now trying to blow everything up as it's being built up. So in the comment section, someone's saying, what is the solution? You know what the solution is? Number one, the U.S. should not be anywhere, should not be in anyone else's country. That's number one. Any president making excuses for U.S. soldiers to be anywhere else except within U.S. territory is your enemy. He is an enemy of America's best interests. You want to make America great again, you bring your troops home. They have no right to be anywhere except in the United States. There's no one threatening the United States. You have two oceans on either side of your territory, your actual territory. Nobody is threatening you. Everybody wants to work with you. Build up your own country, build up your infrastructure, reform your education system, take power back from these corrupt corporations that are running your foreign policy instead of working for them, which is what Trump and every other president is doing, and support multipolarism, a balance of power across the globe and invest in that. And anyone, regardless of whether they're Republican or Democrat, regardless of whether they pander to your pet political proclivities or not, anyone who is opposed to multipolarism or is trying to undermine it, oppose them and speak out against them. That includes Trump. That includes Joe Biden, Obama, Bush, and everyone else. It's simple. It really is that simple.
It is, but it's that simple, and yet it's so complex and difficult to change.
Yeah.
So yeah, I think that's actually a good place to wrap it up. Brian, anything else you would like to add?
No, just thank you again for having me on, and look forward to doing it again soon. And if you're available, I'm going to be doing a live stream my Sunday evening. If you're in America, your Sunday morning.
And I will most likely be attending that live stream. So guys, make sure you go over and check out Brian's YouTube page. You can find the link in the YouTube description of this video. That page is the New Atlas. Go over there and check it out. Brian has been spot on for years now, but specifically since I've been really paying attention, a year and a half, Brian has been on the absolute money. So go and check him out. He writes great articles, he produces great videos, and he is constantly doing guest spots on other people's podcasts. So Brian, I very much appreciate you coming on today. I know everybody in the chat appreciates you as much as I do. Everybody in the chat, you guys have a fantastic rest of your weekend. And I will see you on Brian's live stream tomorrow. Brian, you have a fantastic evening as well, my man.
Likewise. Thanks again.
Goodbye, everybody.